It's 1 minute past, and I see we have 16 people here. That's great. I think we should start. So welcome,
I
everyone.
think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, great, Deb. So welcome to today's session. We're so excited to have you here today. My name is Susanne Salin. I'm one of the three co-conveners of this research interest group, Leadership Preparation and Development. I have the other two, Bernie Moreno from Australia and Deb Outhwaite from England. And also, of course, is our chair of Belmas. And today we're going to have two Swedish colleagues presenting, I hope, a pilot study and present a big research project that they've just got, which is kind of recently launched. Lill Langelotz and Anette Forssten Seiser. I'm really looking forward to this. And then we have 4 principals or head teachers from Scotland and from Australia that's going to join us in a panel discussion. So I will move forward just to show the guest speakers today, Anette and Lill. I guess you could do a much more or a better presentation of yourself. So I will give the word to you in a short while. And I will also say about the panel participants. We have 2 Scottish head teachers, Megan and Alan, and 2 principals from Australia, Toni and Campbell. You are so welcome. We are so much looking forward to having this panel discussion later during these 2 hours we have together. And as you might have heard, we have already started, I think, to record this session. We always record the main bits of the presentation we do here to then have on our YouTube channel. So we're going to give the word to Lill and Anette. And then I think we should do a shorter Q&A from us, who listens today. And then we will make a presentation of the panel and have a panel discussion with the 4 principals. And we just put in one question as a start off. What has been your experience of emotional labor in your roles, and how do you manage it? And then I hope that Lill and Anette can join the panel with some reflections or perhaps a question or two. And of course, the rest of us can then jump in with some questions or reflections on this important topic. And then I guess it would be time to do some kind of summary or closing remarks to see if we have any information, perhaps from Deb. And we will say something about the next upcoming event next year. Yeah. So I will stop sharing my screen right away like that. And we'll also put down my PowerPoint. And I just give the word, hand it over to Anette and Lill. You're so welcome today. We're so much looking forward to hear your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's a very exciting to be here. And when you reached out, Susanne, to ask whether we were interested to do a short presentation, we were like, yeah. And that was like maybe 6 weeks ago. Yeah. So it was long time, in November. Yes, we can do that. And then I realized that this is a really interesting. Is it a network or what is it?
It's an organization, and we call ourselves a research interest groups, and we have many in the organization of Belmas, and this is ours. So hopefully both are a network and a research interest group.
Thank you. And we Googled it, of course, and went into the web page and so on. And then I started to get very nervous. So thank you again for inviting us. And we will say a few words. I'm working at the University of Gothenburg as an associate professor in education. And I have been teaching in principal education for a while. I'm also the head of internationalization at the department, in Gothenburg, the Department of Education and Special Education. So very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm also nervous because we didn't realize that we were going to do this in English for a lot of British people. So that makes us nervous. But we know that Susanne can help us to translate if we don't find the words. So I think we're in a safe place. I work in Karlstad. That is, we often say in the middle of Sweden, but that's not in the middle. It's still in the south of Sweden. And I'm also an associate professor, but in educational work. We call it educational work. My research interest is school leading, educational leadership, school development, and I often do my research together with the principals, like in action research and things like that. So, yeah. Okay, Lill, shall I start
go
sharing?
ahead.
Yeah.
Please share the presentation. It's also very what do you say, exciting that we have people from Australia here. Aren't you a bit tired now? I hope you will not fall asleep. I guess it's almost bedtime for you. Well, anyway,
it's 8 p.m. It's 8 p.m. and it's still sunny in Melbourne, so not too bad.
Thank you, Benny, for giving us an update on that. And so it's not bedtime for grown-up people, though. So I'm happy for that. The project that Susanne mentioned is Principles Emotional Labor in Volatile Times, and it's myself and Anette, and also a colleague from the University of Gothenburg, Åsa Hirsch, who is part of the project. And I will mention our Australian friends soon. Thank you, Anette. You can swap. Yeah, so the project is... good morning, someone else just showed up.
Should you be, sorry to interrupt, should you be sharing your PowerPoint? Because we can't see it.
Oh!
Well, I can. So that's interesting. Because you have, if you're
I can see it.
Everyone else? Okay, so it's my problem. Yeah. Forget it. I'll fix it.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. So it is funded by the Swedish Research Council. So we just started. We got money last year at this time. So we were very happy, as you can say. It's a lot of money from the Swedish Research Council, and it covers 4 years for the three of us. Of course, not full time, but part time of our work. And we are investigating educational leadership from an affective standpoint, and we think that would be contribute with a fuller understanding of leadership actions, for example, and leadership work. And the overarching aim is to deepen the knowledge of Swedish elementary school principals work, and more specifically to address and readdress the knowledge gaps of elementary school principals work that we have. In Sweden, it's rarely, there is a lack of research concerning emotional labor and emotional work. We have a lot of research on organization and administration and so on, but we think and also did the Research Council think that this is what we need at the moment. And I also want to really emphasize the work we are doing with Australian colleagues. Jane Wilkinson, who is the chief investigator of Sister Project. They started 2 years before us, and we discussed their project in one of our meetings in our international research network, Pedagogy Education Praxis, PEP network. And she was Jane Wilkinson, Professor Jane Wilkinson from Monash University. She was very excited at the time, and she just got funded from the Australian Research Council for a similar project. And we discussed this and we said we have to do the same in Sweden. And so we did. So very generously of the team in Australia, they shared a lot of their thoughts and their ideas. So this project is really based on their ideas from the beginning. And it's Jane Wilkinson from Monash University, it's Lucas Walsh, it's Fiona Longemere and Tim Delaney and Christine Grice from the University of Sydney, and Amanda Keddy, amongst other people. So I really want to emphasize that. I think you can change picture, Anette. Thank you. So this is the research questions. We would like to investigate how emotional labor, and we will come back to what we mean with emotional labor, of course, but how it is understood and experienced by principals, and how do emotions emerge in principals' leading practices. What broad and national and specific contextual and personal factors are significant in such undertaking and expectations and experiences, and what theoretical and practical tools can help us for better understand, prepare and support principals and the systems to navigate this increasingly complex and demanding emotional labor that characterize leaders' work. And we will come back to this theoretical and practical lens that we are using. Wilkinson and colleagues, they talk about that emotions is about knowing, doing, and that it is part of the practice. So to research this, we need a different or a package, a methodological and theoretical package. So we are doing an online survey that we just opened, where we collect principals' critical incidents and descriptions of a critical incident and the emotions and the handling of emotions in that critical incident. And we also are planning for, and we are just about to start, 4 case studies in different schools in different parts of Sweden, 4 different schools, where we are going to shadow principals, 16 weeks in total, 4 weeks at each school, over 2 years. And then we also have workshops with key educational stakeholders. So we just started that. We had one workshop last week with people in the municipality level, school leaders at the municipality level. And before that, in September, we also met representatives from educational authorities and the union and research agencies and so on. And it is very, very exciting because this seems to be a topic that is interesting for a lot of people. So we have no problem to attract people to come to the workshops or to answer the survey. So that is also something that strengthens our ambition to do this work. We have, as you can see, as we are doing these kind of workshops, we have an activist ambition or a transformative ambition inbuilt in the methodological package. So in our project, both in Sweden and Australia, we bring together practice theories and feminist theories. We take a practice theoretical point of departure, and from this perspective, emotions play a very important role according to Schatzky. Emotions guide our actions because they signal what matters to us, in what way. Emotions helps decide or determine what to becomes the thing to do, according to Schatzky. But in practice theory, emotions are not understood as something purely individual or internal. Instead, we can say that they are seen as social and as something people do in practice. So there are these activities that happen in interaction. Hence, we are going to shadow principles, as I just mentioned, to capture these actions, the sayings and the doings that people do when emotions are in the practice. Many practice theorists also highlight that emotions are central to how people come to know and understand and participate in practice. So from a practice theoretical viewpoint, we meet each other in an intersubjective, physical and social spaces, and that are already arranged in particular ways and held together by these arrangements. And from the theory of practice architectures, we are talking about 3 arrangements that shape what is possible to do and feel and know in a practice. So in everyday work life, and especially in leadership roles, emotions aren't just felt, they are also performed. And we will now turn to Hochschild's concept of emotional labor. And I think that is over to you, Anette.
Thank you, Lill. Yeah, so this is what we're going to look for, using the theory of practice architectures, among other theories. But what we are looking for is what is happening, what is happening when we can see this kind of emotional labor going on. And as you said, it's Hochschild, and as you can see, it's not like a new theory, but it's a new theory or a concept to use in Swedish research connected to educational leadership. So Hochschild, she talks about the management of feeling to create a publicly observable facial and bodily display. And sometimes she writes that it's all about handling your own and other emotions. So emotional labor can be part of what is required of a principal to build a trusting relation with students and guardians. A principal emotional labor in such context may involve both the display and suppression of their own emotion, but also about handling others' emotions. And this must be carried out in a way that is professional appropriate. And what is considered appropriate is determined by established social norms, referred to as feeling rules within this emotional labor concept. That is a set of social signals that encourage individuals to consider whether their way of expressing or managing emotion is socially acceptable or not in a professional situation. So even if a guardian loses their temper, shouts, and behaves aggressively in conversation with the principal is expected to remain calm. So if the principal were to act out their emotions by shouting back, they would violate the feeling rules associated with the professional role. So acting in accordance with socially and professional accepted feeling rules often involves suppressing negative emotions. You want to say something, Lill?
No.
No?
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Um, well, it's my turn to say something anyway, so that's why you heard me, I think. And I also realized that there are more people coming in from Melbourne, for example. So back to the joint work with a research group in Australia. They asked us to write a chapter in a book called Relationality, Emotions and Effect in Education and Research through a Theory of Practice Architecture's Lens. And this book is edited by Jane Wilkinson and colleagues, as you can see. And it's a springy publication, and it will be out there soon, we hope. It's forthcoming. I think it's under press at the moment. And they, as I mentioned, the research team in Australia, they are way before us in this. So we used our pilot study as we just started this project. We also, before that, had a pilot study and other studies from educational leadership practices that we could use to do our contribution to this book. And our chapter, Anette, is on the next slide. Our chapter is named The Emotional Labor of Swedish Principals in Structurally Disadvantaged Areas. And we will present a few of the findings when we applied this theory of practice architectures in combination with the concept of emotional labor. So to understand the kinds of emotional labor that we have identified, just let me briefly describe the data we draw on. The data analyzed here come from two different studies, and as I mentioned, one of our pilot studies. And the first source is part of a long-term network collaboration between principals, municipal officials, do you say that? In a large local education administration, and researchers in a university-based principal preparation program. And for this chapter, we went back and revisited some of the early material from 2020. The conversations and discussions amongst the principals has been recorded, and we could go back to that material and put this lens of practice architectures and emotional labor on it. And the second data that we used here was collected in a principal education course in 2024, and we tried out this survey where we asked principals from different parts of Sweden to describe their critical incidents in written testimonies. And this is the same questions and that we are using in the main study. And it's important to note that all principals in both studies work in schools located in structurally disadvantaged areas in low SES communities in Sweden. This is particular for this project. When we now are doing this main project, we have different or various kinds of municipalities and communities taking part in the study. So anyhow, across the two data sets, there were strong stories about external violence and connected to the neighborhoods, for example, in which the schools were situated. So we can see that principals and the emotional labors of principals are intertwined, or with a site around the school. So principals describe shootings, physical assaults, murders, and sudden deaths in the community that had deep emotional impact, of course, on students, on teachers, and on the principals themselves, clearly. And just to clarify, in the 2024 study, the task was simply to describe an incident in their professional lives that involved strong emotions. So the fact that so many principals chose incidents involving external violence is in itself a powerful finding, we think. And I'll let you read the text. I will not read it for you. So these quotes are from both materials. There are different principles from different parts of Sweden saying this. And the next quote is also related to the site in which the school is placed. This principle she is discussing, this is from the early 2020 material, and she's saying, this is what our work looks like. We lead the school, and we lead the students, and we lead the parents, and then we have a little shooting here and there, and then we lead and we deal with that too, and then we go back and work a bit on school development. And but the chapter with the shooting, serious violence and gang crime is a little more common in our schools than in other schools in the city. So when we go back to the material, we can see all this frustration and the emotional labor, this
Sorry, I slipped there, Lill. Were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess that some of you will react when Lill is describing that theme from the Swedish principle. That this is not the way how the Swedish schools are, like the picture of Swedish schools. So everything has changed, and it's changed rapidly in Sweden. And another theme that we can see in both this data material is how this external condition affect the principals' practice in a way that they want to protect their schools. So they have like real big efforts in protecting their schools. And when they describe that, you can hear that they have a lot of feelings of anger and frustration. And that's the thing that we have chosen to describe as protective behaviors. And all the principles, they emphasize that the school and the day at the school has to be or provide a safe place, both for the students and the staff. And some of them, or several of the principals, they identify themselves as a kind of gatekeeper, as you can see there. They say that we need to keep crime, drugs, mischief, and fighting away from the teachers and the classroom to protect the teaching. As a principal, I must work a lot with safety creating measures in various ways. Protective work also concern resources. So principals, they want to protect finances for teaching, but due to the crimes, the threats, the violence, they are forced to allocate funds for security and surveillance. So as the second principle says that I can get so annoyed that money which should go to the classroom is spent on guarding the school's entrance. But at the same time, principals stress the importance of leadership as protecting teaching itself. So my leading intention are about protecting teaching, so that we all the time keeping the teaching in center and don't get eaten by everything around us. So once again, you can see how the context is intertwined with the emotional labor of principals. Due to the housing segregation in Sweden, these schools' cohorts are mainly immigrants or newly arrived children, often without Swedish as their first language. Academic knowledge, though, varies widely, compounded by poverty and social injustice. And because local politicians don't know enough about the situation of the school, oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I guess I'm on the wrong picture now. I hope, yeah. Is
No,
it?
it's okay, Anette.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah. We just sorry. So, and because the local politicians don't know enough about the situation at the school, they suggest things that don't work. And I think that's the last one that there was one politician that suggested that they would offer what do you call it, like mother tongue language online. But as you can see in the last quote, that they have students who don't have Wi-Fi at home, or they have students that are not allowed to bring their computers home. So the suggestions from the politicians are completely stupid, is what the principal says. They don't know what is the context. Yes, and the first quote is more about how they discuss that there is a big difference between different schools or different students, and that's the case in all Swedish schools. But in these schools, that difference is not like a small difference. It's a big gap instead.
Yeah, and when we are using the theory of practice architectures, it helps us to reveal what kind of arrangements that are impacting the emotional labor and the practice of principles. So Anette mentioned what we could call the cultural discursive arrangements. The principal said stupidity, but we would like to also explain it with a conceptual framework, and so we can see that there are discourses around the Swedish school, for example, and where we think the Swedish school looks like some kind of fantasy, where it often does, but in these particular sites there are different conditions that impact on the schools, of course. So the principals not only struggle to emotionally handle the cultural discursive ignorance of others and also the material economic arrangements, they also try to control the emotions and relatings between the teachers and students. And this we call in the name of love. By emphasizing teaching and encouraging the teachers to show fewer caring emotions and focus on the professional mission. In other words, focus on the teaching and learning. And that is the first quotation. It's about getting the teachers to understand that if you just cherish and hug them and feel sorry for them, it's not going to help. We have a professional mission, and the professional mission is our students' rights. In other words, they have the right to their education. And if, out of misguided kindness, we lower the standards, that's not good. So the principles describe challenges linked to the teacher's knowledge mission and the need for love of the students. Simultaneously, they try to encourage the teachers to navigate their feelings towards controlled emotions as effective states that are shown. Not only did the principals try to guide the teachers to control their feelings of compassion, but they also emphasized that the teachers and themselves must love the students and the school in which they work. And quotation 2 is like, sometimes in our school, and she mentions the name, we say, it is good if you are skilled in what you do, meeting the work tasks one has. In addition, we notice that it helps if you are good at your work and love it. It's not enough to be skilled. We must love our students a bit, and also our school. And what we want to emphasize is that it's not a problem that you love your students and the schools, but if this is not acknowledged as a work, then it is almost invisible, and that we could frame in a feminist theories about women who are used in the system. There were also cultural discursive traces in the love discourses imported from the US at this time, impacting on the idea of what emotions were expected and needed in low-cess schools, as expressed in the following excerpt, or the quotation. You can read it yourself, I think.
Okay. So we hope that the clash between the discourse about the Swedish school and the lived reality in these communities are becoming clear to you now. And this is another way of showing how the principle work with emotional labor. This is an example from when the principal talked to a teacher where she is going to recruit for the school. And she describes how she prepared this new teacher for how it's going to be to work in this school. So this is what she describes in that talk with her principal colleagues. And nowadays, when I recruit, I must talk with the teachers about a normal progression when one starts at the school. And this is what she says to the teacher. You will at the start feel blissful, and that is great that you work here. And then, after a few weeks or months, you will dip and feel, oh, I can't anything, and the children can't anything. And there are new children who starts all the time, and the parents don't speak Swedish, and everything is so difficult. And you will come to me and cry, and you will say that you are not made for this, and that you won't, and that you can't anything. And I usually say, right now, I don't think you should quit, but we will work together, and you will rise again quite steadily. So that's how they recruit new teachers in this context. And the last one is also about how she feel about not having the support from the municipality or the management. And this story is about a girl that was pointed out as a snitcher, and everything. She was not to blame, but she was the one that the classmates or the students at the school decided that she was a snitcher. She was the one who told who had done a thing where the police has been involved at the school. But this went really, really, really wrong because this girl felt so bad that she had to search for a new school. So the parents and the girl had to leave this school. And the principals talk about this as a really emotional thing. She said that everything was so unfair. I had a hard time letting go and thought of it nonstop for 2 weeks. I was not able to think of or do anything else at the time. And there was frustration that the police did not provide any support whatsoever. And the local educational authorities argues for disciplinary measures to avoid making decisions about relocation in the hope that the parents themselves will apply to change school. This principal felt that it was so unfair that this girl was the one that had to leave the school when they knew that she was not the one to blame for what had happened. And the last excerpt is it describes a situation charged with both repressed and expressed emotion during a visit from the local politicians. And the principal describes the school is forced to handle all the challenges by themselves. And she recalls how this situation ended up in a direct confrontation. And she says that I had a bunch of politicians visit me at school after a high-profile safety incident. And there was a whole entourage that came to me. And then the party leader said, yes, I understand your situation at the school. And I just said, bullshit, you have no idea. I was nice when I said hello and welcome, but then I wasn't as nice. I was really upset. I told them, I'm so damn tired of you talk. You just talk, and then absolutely nothing happens. So this is an example where the emotion, you can also work with emotional labor. You don't always have to repress. You can also express the emotion when you need it. So we'll finish up this. But if you remember, we had this sister study going on in Australia, and I think the name of that study was Invisible, that this is an invisible work. And we have been discussing this a lot after just doing this analysis of this material. And we are really unsure if we will call it invisible because we think it's all over. We can see it all the time when principals are talking or writing about their work. So perhaps it's not invisible, but it's neglected.
Mm-hmm. And last slide will let you in. Again, emotional labor is crucial in principal work, and I would say teachers work in a lot of different professions. However, in education, it has not, and especially in Sweden, it has not been very talked about before. So we are really looking forward to continue our studies, and also including different areas in Sweden, as we just had these very specific structurally disadvantaged areas in the first results. So acknowledging emotional labor is important and crucial for principals' ability and motivation to stay in the profession, for example. And we hope that the work we are doing will reveal ways of handling emotions and also support, because there seems to be a lack of support and acknowledgement of this important work that are happening every day. So thank you. Last slide. Thank you for listening. We look forward to the discussion and your questions, of course. And you can also see the website address at the bottom. That is in Swedish, if you like to practice some Swedish. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an interesting, moving and important presentation about your ongoing research in Sweden. I will turn to all the participants. If anyone has a reflection or a question, you could write it in the chat, or you can kind of raise your hand and we will see who wants to go first.
Don't all jump at once, everybody. I think I'm going to say a few things when we get to the end after our discussion, but I think the thing that strikes me about that presentation, both of you, thank you very much for that this morning, very insightful, is that we have got a range of different types of school principals with us. So I'm just thinking, Toni, about the context that you're in a grammar school in Melbourne. I've worked in an English public school as well as disadvantaged schools in an English context. And emotional labour, Lill and Anette, plays out very different ways, doesn't it, in very different socioeconomic contexts. So we know that the emotional labour, pressures in our challenging socioeconomic contexts, and some of your quotes today really reinforce that. I've seen huge amounts of emotional labour from principals in what people would assume are incredibly socially advantaged contexts as well. I don't know if you want to come in there, Toni, and then we'll go to Megan and Marie.
Yeah, I'd love to come in. I'm principal. Hello, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. I'm principal of Melbourne Girls Grammar, which is a very privileged school, girls' school in inner city Melbourne. And this is my second headship. I was previously principal at the McRobertson Girls High School, which is a government school. And I've spent most of my working life in government schools. And so when I made the transition to this independent school, I actually thought, how different is it going to be? But there is schools are schools, teachers are teachers, parents are parents, and kids are kids. So there's more in common than less in common, but there is definitely different types of emotional labour. And I think there's different expectations as well in different types of schools for different reasons. This is a great topic. I've got so much to say, but I don't want to take up the time. One of the things that really resonated me, thank you so much for that presentation. It was brilliant. The concept about loving them. I often say you sort of hold yourself, and it's about, I take everyone with reverence in my community and I love them. And even if their behavior I may not like their behavior or what they do or what they're saying or how they're acting, but as a principal, there's a deep love for my community that I want to support and want to help. And so it's how you manage that and compartmentalize that without, I think, damaging yourself is an important thing that you learn over time, and some days you're better at it than others.
Thanks, Toni. Yes, it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? That whole range of behaviours and range of expectations we have on our principals as well. Megan, and I'd like to just apologise for the confusion over your name, not least, of course, because Megan Crawford, who's our Vice President at Belmas, has written a book on emotional leadership. So to have her name in the frame this morning as well, that's got very confusing. So over to you, Megan.
Thanks. I found a lot of the quotes really interesting, and kind of thinking about my own context of the school that I lead. Similarly, in a very sort of deprived area, most deprived postcodes in terms of our Scottish index of multiple deprivation. But the idea about that kind of misplaced care and feeling sorry for and empathising with young people, giving them a hug and cherishing them, that's not going to make a difference. And I think that's very much the experience I've had in my first few years. And going in and trying to look at ways in which to maximise attainment and achievement for young people, but you sometimes find that some of the barriers that exist within the local community, that young people might face, become almost an excuse. So our young people wouldn't be able to do that, or our young people can't do that, or our families won't engage with that, or the community can't do. And as a result of that, it's it's too difficult for them, or there's too many barriers, or financially that's an issue, and it becomes an excuse rather than actually looking to remove those barriers and try and put things in place to support young people in achieving their best, knowing that that is the absolute best outcome for them, leaving, my secondary school when they're 17, 18 years old and heading off into, the big world. So, I think that sometimes it sounds quite hard. I think some of my colleagues might have thought I was a bit heartless in some of it. And it's not about not caring for them, but it's about care being in the right place and care about them being what's not happening just at this moment, but about preparing them for the future as well, and our duty and responsibility to do that. So those quotes really, really resonated with me. And I think that's something that's not just specific to those contexts in Sweden, but I think across a number of schools, and I would imagine more so than just, my context as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. I think we've got huge transferability, haven't we, across international context with this whole kind of topic area, really. Thank you. Marie.
Hi, good morning, good evening. Thank you for that. It was a really interesting presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And it resonates with work that I'm doing with my colleagues, Stella Howden, who's on the line today. So good morning, Stella, and Linda Martindale. But we're looking at compassionate leadership in higher education. And emotional labour is really, a major feature of compassionate leadership. And what struck me listening to the presentation, in fact, Toni's just touched on it there in her comments, but it's a lot about the students, the staff, the parents, the school, and the love for those elements. But what about you as an individual principal? What about that self-care, self-emotion? And I'm just wondering whether that was explored at all. Toni's just touched on it there in terms of compartmentalizing things, but I'm just wondering how that's dealt with, particularly when you've got such extreme behaviors as what has come through in some of the quotes there. So thank you.
Yeah, can I
you
give a reply?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this will be, we are hoping that for the case studies when we are shadowing, when we're going to shadow principals days and days in a row to see how they do this kind of work as well, like self-caring and so on. It's not obvious in this material, but I would like to emphasize it's a small material, so we don't know that yet. But thank you.
Well, that's great. I'll be really interested to hear what comes from that future study.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Marie. Nova?
Thanks, Deb. Sorry, I can't find my little hand.
Don't worry, that's fine. Just wave at me, anyone. I'm happy to respond to that. That's fine.
Don't know where it's gone. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here today. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was absolutely fascinating. And it's something that we've put in the last couple of years into the Into Headship programme at Strathclyde, which is our national headship preparation programme. And over the last couple of years, we have found there to be a much greater need for our participants to really focus on that emotional labour of headship. The things that keep you awake at night, the things that are really stressful. And I wondered, I'm really interested in hearing you talk about the sort of schools that you were doing your research in, and how the sort of priorities had changed, and some really violent things for people to be dealing with. And I wondered if you had any sense of two things. One, when did that change start? And two, do you have any sense of what has caused that change?
Yeah, I think that's a too big question.
Yeah, I know.
But it's I think we are a lot of people in Sweden that are asking the same question. How did we end up here? What happened? And I think quite a lot is to do with the society. We have Sweden used to be like the most equal country in the world, and now we have big gaps between really rich people and really poor people. So this is like a situation that I used to be a teacher in the 80s. We didn't have problems like this, not at all. So it has been both a slow process, but also happened very rapidly because and we don't see it everywhere. So these schools are like special schools, but they are the things that used to happen only in the big cities are now spreading also to the smaller cities. But if I could just also comment on the other things that you said, I think Toni or Deb, I don't remember who talked about that there are different types of emotional labor. We can see that in our material from the new ones that even if you are like in these privileged schools, then you have other kinds of challenges. You can have like very educated parents that demand that the students' grades will be higher and things like that. So I totally agree with you. It's still a lot of emotional labor, even if you are not in this kind of communities. And I love the concept of compassion leadership, because I think that is what these principles are showing. They are compassions and they love their students and their communities. But there are some, I don't know if this is connected to what you said, Megan, but there are some principles that are writing that they are also afraid or worried about becoming like, what you say, hard, losing their empathy, because you can't be you can't be that compassion all the time, because you won't survive, because it's exhausting. And we can see that the principals turnovers and sick leaves are really high in Sweden. So yeah, but everyone is really interested in this kind of research. So I guess that it is an important area to do some research about. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that that our society has drifted apart, and we are not allowed to say that. But and with the introduction of independent schools in the 1990s, the Swedish school system has become increasingly unequal. And we have a lot of research showing this. And there is also this discussion that because the school used to gather people from different parts of the society. We had one school in the municipality, or two schools, but they were, mixed, socioeconomically mixed schools. But since the independent schools were introduced in the 90s, and we have this like middle class drain from to specific schools, which is one thing to add to this.
Yeah, while you were talking there, Lill, I just went to grab my copy of Danny Dorling's Fintopia book, because we know that Finland's often held up as this. And in fact, I nearly got into a very heated conversation about this book at UCEA last week out in the States, because I've done some work with Danny Dorling across my career, and he is, if you haven't come across him, he's the Harvard Mackinder Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford, and he's written a range of books about inequality. And you're both picking up, that range of Swedish inequality. We know Nova, we've got Alison with us today. We know about that sort of inequality in the Scottish context. We're in this time period now where we know that certain politicians, particularly those on the right, are waving the flag and blaming this all on immigration.
Yes.
Actually, this is about fragmented systems and polarized inequity, and the greater our inequity grows, the greater it is more of an issue, isn't it? And it's Danny who's done a lot of that writing about
can you please write his name in the
I will
chat?
Absolutely. And I'll put the one book. He's written a range of books around inequality, but looking at the top 1%. And I was kind of reminded of some of the quotes that are in that particular book while you were putting up some of your principal quotes as well. That's fine, Lou. Thanks for letting us know. It's some really interesting research that Lou's doing for her doctorate here as well. It's really relevant if you want to have a read of that quote that she's just put in, comment that she's just put in the chat. So it is really interesting because we've got these sort of competing versions of reality, haven't we, going on across all these different countries, really, at the moment, which is fascinating, actually. And the similarities between the countries, I always think, are far greater than the differences we're kind of witnessing. So, Bernie, Suzanne, I think we're going to move to our principal panel now.
Yes, I just want to say one reflection to my Swedish colleagues before handing over to Bernie. I'm currently conducting a study here in Sweden where I have done interviews with experienced principals about their strategies for recovery after managing and leading different crises and crisis situations. And the preliminary findings, I think it relates to your ongoing work. It's evident that they are alone in these crises. They are managing a lot of crises, and they have to cope alone, and they have rarely any support for after having dealt with crisis. And I can see kind of, if I use your concept, emotional labor, it's super visible. And I also think what you said last, Anette, about the compassionate leadership, that's also evident in the material. So it's not what I'm looking for especially, but I can relate to your study based on those interviews with 20 experienced principals, which I'm hope to present in Velma's conference next summer. So I hope to invite you guys over to join the conference perhaps another year when you have more results from your project.
Thank you.
I'd love to do that.
Yes.
Thanks, Suzanne. And so now we come to our panel, which of course is not completely separate to the wonderful presentation that we heard. And whilst we do have that big general question, I've written some other ones along the way to get some conversations from the research, but also what's happening on the ground. And we've heard from Toni already about that, and from Megan. So I was wondering, maybe I'll start with you, Campbell, and then with Allan, just on how would you describe the emotional demands of your context, of you in your everyday life at school?
Thank you. I found it very interesting what Toni said, how she's talked into principal of two quite diverse schools. I think my example, though, is probably the most diverse schools you could possibly have. I've gone from one of the most disadvantaged schools in Victoria, our state in Australia, to one of the more advantaged government schools, achieving at some of the highest levels in Australia. And what I've actually found is that the emotional labour is actually quite similar. I don't think it matters whether it's a high achieving school or a very disadvantaged school. The work is always hard because you're always pressing and wanting to raise those high expectations, and indeed, I actually reflected on coming to such an advantaged school after being at such a disadvantaged school, and wondered, will I have the capacity to run that school? And in fact, I found that in many cases the skills and strengths and strategies that I had developed over time were super transferable. So just some interesting noticings there.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell. Allan, welcome. Great to have you here. What does it look like for you? Are there any areas of your everyday life that are emotionally heavier, perhaps, than others? Tell us a little bit about your context.
Sure. I've actually prepared a few slides. Are you okay if I share the slides as well? And
absolutely.
if I say
go
too much,
for it.
please just tell me to shh. because I'm also very good at over-talking. Hopefully this will work. Our school systems aren't particularly good at using Zoom, but fingers crossed that works. Can you see the screen okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's
So,
great.
I'm Allan Lynn. I'm a head teacher of Anderson Primary. My school is located in the bottom left of that picture. I've got 215 pupils in my school. So 215 pupils in a very transient population. We're a city centre school. 75% of my children have English as additional language. I've got 34 different languages spoken in my school. So a lot of similarities to what Anette and Lill were talking about earlier. But while we were chatting, and this morning while I was kind of preparing some of this, I had a look at the Twitter. I posted on Twitter that I was sharing some information today. This is the kind of current climate of emotional labour that head teachers are dealing with. On the left-hand side there is a school that's located between Megan and myself. It's in Gardner Primary. They've had protests outside the school because the school are delivering ESOL classes supporting English for families who don't have English as a first language. We also deliver these in our school, but I'm lucky that the media haven't picked up on it. But the head teacher who's in that school is a colleague of both Megan and I, who we were on the Into Headship programme together, the programme that Nova was mentioning. We studied at Glasgow University, but a really difficult time for that head teacher. I genuinely don't know what the man is going through. I feel so terrible for him, absolutely horrible. And just on the right-hand side, there's a tweet that I noticed while I was tweeting this morning from a head teacher. This is a head teacher in England who was on television as one of our talent programmes, Britain's Got Talent, and he took his choir on and performed in a choir. But today he posted that he cried last night at his staff meeting, not for attention, not for making a point, but just basically because he's burnt out. The picture across the country is grim just now, with special educational needs, it's called in England, and additional support needs up here in Scotland. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I'm facing just now in my school. I've got 215 kids, really transient, but a lot of significant additional support needs due to lack of resourcing, NHS and additional things. But really looking at my journey into headship, as I say, as a head teacher, I see leadership not as a fixed role, but more of a dynamic practice, and it's shaped by my values, relationships, and my context. My transition into headship was supported by the Into Headship and the current In Headship programme that I'm on with Megan, and it emphasised a lot of reflection, identity shaping. Self-evaluation's been more than a checklist to me, and it's guided our meaningful actions, such as targeted professional development mentoring, and it strengthens my ability to lead with equity and excellence just across my school. My professional identity has evolved as I've navigated the shifting demands. I've only been in my school for a year and a half, and I'm a new head teacher. But I definitely have the persistent belief that I've got imposter syndrome, and probably similar to a lot of colleagues, that I came from a background that my family didn't go to university. I'm the first person in my family to go through the further education process and have a professional career. But definitely reflecting back on it, it's helped me to understand the broader influence that my leadership has got in my learners in the community, similar to what Megan was saying about her school. My leadership is grounded in values of integrity, social justice and inclusion, yet headship often requires a balance of empathy and decisiveness. And at times the role can feel really isolating. I'm sitting here just now in my big chair in my office, and it is the loneliest place in the school. A powerful example I've got is I've got a member of staff who's going through a terrible personal loss just now. An experience reminded me of shown the vulnerability and emotion is not a weakness. I genuinely went to her house and cried. I absolutely cannot believe the experience the girl was going through. But I think it's essential to human dignity to foster a compassionate school culture. And I know that emotional labour is part of our leadership, and embracing it strengthens our trust and relationships in the team. Leadership today means navigating constant change and disruption. And I mentioned about Lill and Livingston. They argue that crisis leadership requires adaptive and creative approaches. And I found this to be true on a daily basis. I think I was at a conference last week with Nova, presenting something similar about the challenges that we have. It's a daily or hourly basis. But looking at collaborative cultures, encouraging experimentation and pedagogy, I aim to create a school environment that thrives in imaginative problem solving and systematic awareness. The proactive style of leadership it's really important. And my very last slide is just about looking ahead. I can definitely see my leadership as a continuous cycle of reflection and equity. My vision is to cultivate a school culture that's inclusive, resilient, and critically reflective, one that empowers both my staff, my pupils, and all my families to change collaboratively. The future is definitely not fixed. It's got to remain responsive and evolving to context, policy, landscapes, and community needs, and even reflecting this morning on what I've seen in the media. I've learned to embrace tensions between policy and values, but the strategy and relationships is spaces for innovation, and leading through the foresight and adaptability means I'm able to sustain meaningful change for all learners. And I definitely couldn't have done it without the in-headship programme and the into-headship programme and the current in-headship programme that I'm on, that really helps us to develop as school leaders, or as new school leaders in Scotland. So I wasn't quite sure what was expected of us this morning, but I just pulled together a few slides this morning, more because Nova knows that I ramble on a bit as I was doing at the presentation last week, but hopefully that was kind of helpful and gives a bit of context around my school and the kind of situations we're facing here in Scotland.
No, thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. And I hope the other principals here don't feel that they had to have a presentation. We said that you didn't have to, but we value what you've shared with us, and we've you know, it's been so important. And I particularly wanted to highlight something that you said about supporting staff. So there's that emotional, it's like the Bronfenbrenner in a way. There's that emotional labour that's about you yourself that has been brought up earlier. But then there's those closest to you supporting your staff, which I think is so important, the way emotional labour, and you shared that with us, how it manifests itself. I wanted to perhaps move to an outer circle from that and ask you about, and this is a question for the four of you, about dealing with families or community pressures. How does emotional labour manifest itself in those circumstances? Anyone from our principals is welcome to share their thoughts. Toni.
I think it's really important to know who you are as a person and to hold true to the values of yourself and not compromise those, but also understand your school vision and values and continually come back at that, you know. So parents are, you know, constantly throwing things to you that maybe they're disagreeing or they're acting badly. And I think it's really important that you don't compromise the school and who you are. You hear people out, and but you always have kind of a protective lens on yourself and the school. For example, you know, at my school, I've got a beautiful office in my school. I'm really privileged. In my office, I've got like a lounge. I can talk, I can have a meeting there. That's one kind of feeling. I've got a board table. I can sort of have a meeting there, which is more formal. And then I've got another, you know, 2 chairs next to my kind of computer, which I can have another sort of type of meeting. So I can choose the style of meeting that's going to protect me. And there are some parents that I never let into my office ever, because it's my space. And
Sure.
I don't want their bad juju in my space. And so it's, you know, I take that to the more formal boardroom to do that. But it's also having, I suppose, the wherewithal to go, okay, how do I think this is going to go? How do I best listen, hear someone out, allow them to feel valued without compromising me? And one of the things you do as principal is you're code switching all the time. So you might go from a meeting with a staff member to a meeting with a parent, to alumni, to someone who's grieving, to someone who is angry, and you're actually holding many things in you, and you're switching all the time. I worry about the long-term impact of that. And you spoke before about, becoming hardened. I think principals have to allow themselves time to kind of reflect, and because it is lonely, it's a very sort of lonely position, but you have to have time where, it's like a tree with the roots down deep. What's feeding you? And so you've got to look for those, carve out time for nurturing, carve out time for what fills you up, so that you can go back into those kind of high levels of emotional kind of labor positions. But it's about being really clever in how you position yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Toni. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else who'd like to make a comment?
I could do
Annette, yes,
I do
of
like
course.
I do. I think it's nice to use your real hand. I think I will answer your question with the reflection and connected to what Toni said. I think it's interesting that, and Alan also talked about supporting the staff. And what Toni is describing, you start to think who is protecting the principals, the school leaders, who is there for you, and when we have read about emotional labor, we can see that some professions, they really get training for handling this kind of work. Like if you are a policeman, or you actually train in delivering like hard messages to the family or things like that. So you practice. And other professions, they have like in the system, they have every second week they go to someone and just talk what you have
some
been
kind of
doing.
counseling.
Yeah, so
supervision, clinical supervision,
yes,
like
thank
that.
you. So that's like in
That's
the
right.
system. It's in there. It's not when you need it. It's always there. So I think when we listen to principals describing their daily work, it's a lot of things that is not in there. I don't know how your principal training program looks like, but in Sweden we don't train principals for this kind of professions.
We don't have a principal program in Australia.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they're not prepared, but it just doesn't happen in a formal way like that as such. Megan.
Just reflecting on the kind of question you asked about families, and then probably I'll link a little bit in terms of our training programme as well. But I think one of the things, there's a bit of the longer that you are in a place and the relationships that you build up with both the young people and then the families as a result of that, it does become easier in a way. You can have those conversations that might be a bit more challenging. You maybe know a bit more of the background of maybe what's been going on with a family. And so therefore sometimes, you know, that kind of communication is a bit more open. And certainly I'm 2.5 years as head teacher in my school. I was a deputy head in another school in Glasgow for 5 years before that. And those relationships with the group of young people, the young people in the school that I was working with, you know, deepened over time with the families, and it, you know, it became a lot easier to kind of know how to respond, kind of know about some of the issues that might come up, and to be kind of a bit forearmed maybe about the supports that I could put in place or how I could signpost them. I think one of the things for me is that post-COVID, having been in senior leadership as a deputy head and a head teacher now for almost 10 years, the change in how families see schools post-COVID, I think, is quite different. And I know we're talking COVID 5 years ago, but I do think that schools are really still these places of support. They're a kind of go-to for a lot of the families in my area, where perhaps some of the services that were there for young people to support are either no longer there post-COVID, or there's been a kind of, some of the services are overwhelmed. So, for example, young people's mental health would be one that's a sort of a really big challenge. There's not a huge level of support. There are things that we can signpost families and young people to, but families will come to us because they can come into the school and speak to someone. If they try and make a doctor appointment, they're maybe waiting quite a little bit of time for that. So I think, you know, the way in which personally myself and I'm sure, you know, having spoken with colleagues in the programme, that's something that you know that we've very much seen as being different. I think, you know, one of the big supports I've had, and Alan has mentioned that into headship and in headship programmes that we've been part of, that peer network that we have of new head teachers or aspiring head teachers, that's been a huge support. I've faced, I think as every head teacher does, you face some really challenging situations, you know, across your time there, whether it's community issues, whether it's bereavements in school community, whether it's just tensions and stresses that you face. And actually having a group of people there as a sounding board and a kind of a support network to kind of share and talk about some of the things that are going on has been a huge support for me. The authority that Alan and I work in, certainly with head teachers. There's 29 secondary schools, and I know each and every one of the 29 secondary heads really well. And so you're a phone call away, or a Teams call away, or a short drive away from head teacher colleagues as well, which I think has made a big difference, particularly for me in my kind of early years in headship as well. And I do think that the programmes there have been really good in providing, you know, that kind of support network, providing an opportunity to critically reflect on things that are going on, you know, with colleagues, and just sometimes being able to have, you know, a wee bit of a moan, or a wee bit of a kind of vent about something that's going on that's taken a lot of, you know, your emotional labour. It's taken a lot of headspace as well. So I do think it's a really valuable kind of programme from my own experience. And certainly Alan and I have benefited. He's heard many of my rants that have happened when there's been things going on that you just want a sounding board for, and you don't have it within the school, but you absolutely have it within this group of people that you're working with.
That is so true. Thank you for pointing that out. And we know it's not only in Scotland. In fact, Suzanne and I have been doing a study and a paper that we're writing about. We've been asking new principals how they perceived their preparation, and in Sweden as well, those cohorts that come with those preparation programs have been so valuable. In Australia, while we don't have those cohorts, they do reach out and create their own networks as well as important soundboards. Deb.
Yeah, I feel like the messages that are in the chat are absolutely coinciding with what I was going to say. That was a terrific set of examples you just gave there, Megan. Thank you so much for that. So, Nova, I was going to say that having been out at UCEA last week and talking to a lot of people who've been former US superintendents, the role I had as a system leader in the English system very much picked up a lot of that, because I worked across a big patch. So it wasn't officially part of the job description, but if you're running your CPLD for your heads, that's what they do, right? They come and offload. And so there are people like Alison have heard me say this on many occasions now, but the comparisons to the Swedish system, and potentially more to do with the Australian system, in comparison to what you're role modelling in Scotland, that we know it's not perfect. We know that you've got, your issues, but the stuff that you're doing, and Alan's examples there with Megan's examples, when I first started my system leader role in England, I knew all of those heads. All of those heads came to those meetings. 8 years later, less than half, I now don't go to them, because my bit of the system doesn't exist anyway, because they're in different groups, right? We don't have local authorities. They're not doing that oversight. And famously, England is the one country in the world who introduced a national professional qualification for headship. We were the first country to do it back in 1990, or piloted it in 1994, introduced it as mandatory under the Labour government after 97, and then the coalition government kicked it out in 2012. So we're the first ones and the ones to remove it as well. But this area of supervision, and also the combination of the number of other services that schools have picked up through austerity. So the collapse, with 15 years into austerity, even that budget that we've had in English or in a UK context last night, yes, tax goes up. There's still not the mileage to put all those services back in that have been taken out through austerity. So this is a new model of schools moving forward, and the principals and heads moving forward in that context and having to cope with that workload. And in other areas where your heads, Bernie was saying, it doesn't mean they're not supported in Australia. There are ways of supporting them. In an English context, what we're seeing is rapid burn, right? We've got recruitment retention crisis. People go in, they do it for a couple of years, they're exhausted, and they move on, often to their own type of consulting company that the landscape is absolutely full of. And Dave and I, you've mentioned Dave McPartland, Alan, Dave and I have had conversations around, what bits of the system he's now supporting. So he works with one of my colleagues and goes and does motivational talks in other schools for their heads. He's a terrific head, but a lot of our heads are on their knees with the pressure across the system.
No, and good point, Deb, how they've had to, since COVID particularly, picked up other agencies, other roles that didn't belong in the school. Lill, and then Toni.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say if you just to give a reflection on what I've just heard, and pointing back to our ambition in our research program to have this activist ambition, sort of, or at least to have some kind of policy impact, hopefully. And I think you pointed out interesting things. And for me, from the perspective, from the theoretical perspective, it is about the material economic arrangements, for example, that Toni, you pointed that you have these different kind of offices or where you can put, I mean, you just mentioned that you don't let all parents into your like your key office, that you can have them outside and so on. And I think that kind of examples are very fruitful to pass on to our politicians and so on, because that could not be the only, it's not up to the individual to arrange these kind of things. This must be part of the arrangements around the principal leading practice, I think. And also what you pointed to, the social, political arrangements like mentoring or different kind of networks that could also be arranged, although we know that networks are up to the individuals within the network, but it could also be supported with time and perhaps some kind of money around it, so people really can or people, but leaders can take part in this kind of social economic arrangements around their practice. And so thank you so much. I'm taking notes for all the things you have said.
And what you've said really links into moving away from being visible to acknowledged, rather than invisible and neglected.
Yes,
So
definitely.
there's the shift that is needed. Toni.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that in Victoria, where we are, there are 4 government authorities for all schools, independent, Catholic, and government schools, and the Academy of Teaching and Leadership is one of the government authorities, and that provides principal preparation and principal training programs, which are really scaffolded and extensive. And in fact, in a government system, you can't become a principal unless you've done those courses. And also in the independent Schools Victoria kind of space, which is another professional association, there's also aspiring principals where they prepare people who want to be principals, but they tend to be more in technical things rather than the emotional things. And so I think this is a really important thing, because as a new principal, often you're not prepared for that. One of the things that's been really helpful for me as a principal, which started in COVID, was I'm a principal of a girls' school. There's a whole lot of girls' schools in Melbourne, and we all connected on a WhatsApp group. We have a principal head WhatsApp group, and we have any question that comes up to us, we just go, guys, I'm thinking this, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And it's immediate feedback, and it's a great collegial kind of support. And also in Victoria, or in Australia, we have the Australian Heads of Independent Schools Association, and I'm part of a hub of 5 schools which are close to me, and I'm really close to their principals there. So that notion of reaching out with that collegial support, I don't think you can do it as a principal if you're just doing it in isolation. You need to lean in to your colleagues, and for me, especially to my female principal colleagues, they're a safe place. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Toni. Anette.
Thank you, and thank you for our comments about how to become a principal, how you prepare to become a principal. I just want to connect to one of the questions I was happy to find in the chat from Amanda about emotional labor connected to gender or to women. because Lily, you can help me in here now, but we are right now doing a policy study and looking back on how Swedish policies has expressed or not expressed emotional labor, also connected to gender or to women. And we found this very interesting thing in the 1970s when there was this was a time when Sweden really was into equity, just call that, between men and women. They were equal, yeah. So that was really a big thing in the 70s. And a lot of the principals in Sweden were men at that time. And then they also had this big change that the principal's role was more, it's changing from being an academic leader only to more become like a person in a democratic society, realizing, or what do you say, put into practice democratic decisions.
And values, yes.
Values, yes. So that will quite change the profession for principals, and they don't talk about emotional labor, but they write about that this will require another kind of skills, strategies, and in the same writing they say that I think we therefore will need more women in the profession. So Amanda, I think it's really connected to gender. I think there is like someone somewhere thought that this is what women are good doing, like doing the emotional labor. So now we need more women. And we have an old professor in Sweden. He says this is a school development project that we really were successful in, because today I think it's like 80% of all principals in Sweden are women. But this has also resulted in that the salary has gone down, the status has gone down. So I think, Amanda, your question is really interesting, and I think we are going to dig deeper into that question. And I think that's why it's so important to make it a part of the profession and not something that it's like for the women to deal with.
Exactly. Part of the role and part of the professionalization of being a school leader. Alison.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was late in joining and missed the presentation. I look forward to seeing the video. I was just thinking around the concept or the idea of leadership as activism, and a quote from a research participant was that head teachers are very loud in their networks and their communities, and then when it comes to local authority meetings, they don't speak up and are very quiet. And I think part of it is perpetuating the idea that people know head teachers care, they're compassionate, they will go the extra mile and do the utmost for the school communities. But unless collectively heads push back against what is becoming kind of unrecognisable and overwhelming, the system won't change, and we will have kind of continued and further recruitment and retention crisis. So it'll be interesting. I'm not currently a head, I was for 12 years. I wonder just how long we can sustain the emotional labour and the fact that head teachers are coping with every kind of support for children and young people, families and communities.
And thank you for raising that, because something we haven't talked about is about emotional, we've talked about with teachers, with parents, community, staff, but what happens with policy implementation, or when, how do you manage emotional labour when things are imposed onto you as a school leader and you just have to do something? And so you've got, on the one hand, perhaps this sense that, this is the last distraction that you need in your school, but it's something you have to do, and you have to support your staff, because leading that change is one of the most important things you can do for them and for the whole school. So I wonder if there are any thoughts about that or any experiences. Campbell.
I might pick up on one that's not quite policy, but probably very relevant to many people around the world with COVID. And I actually led two schools across the COVID period. One was a rural school, one was a city school. And here in Victoria, we had 200 days of lockdown where we had to teach remotely. So it was a significant impact on us. And one of the things that I really found was valuable in that space was a phrase someone taught me, and that is, I'm responsible to my staff, but not for them. And because the emotional labor was huge. And so when I was responsible to them, if they were ringing me up in tears, struggling to manage their own children, let alone classroom and the work that they were doing, then I was able to, sort of not disassociate myself for them, but direct them into sort of good practices. So, for example, we had a sharing opportunity every day with staff to say, what are we doing to manage our day, to look after ourselves, to give ourselves time as well as do our teaching. And so I was responsible to them to do those good positive things that was hopefully going to help them through that situation. The other one is then being responsible for, well, I'm not responsible for them. And that took a lot of pressure off me. And it's something I use often in my work. I'm not responsible for everyone as they go home in their life and what they do and their well-being, but I'm responsible to them to direct them towards, self-care or medical care or whatever it might be. And that's been a really, really powerful one in helping me with that emotional labor. Because there's a clear line for me as to what I take on board and how much that affects me. And 22 years as a school principal across 3 schools, maybe it's I've possibly had that sort of awareness, but not quite that wording to do that work.
But how important to know that distinction of where to draw the line, because that's where where you draw the line is where you start looking after yourself as well. So it's got obviously 2 sides to it. Thank you for sharing that, and also that brings us, I guess, to one of the most important things. We tend to finish with things like this. This is the Leadership Preparation and Development Research Interest Group. So we always have to bring that lens in and say, how do we teach emotional labor? How do we prepare formally, informally? What are some of the novel ways in which this is happening? Helen Good, I know that, you mentioned earlier, this is an important part of the subject that, one of the subjects that we teach in our specialisation in Ed Leadership at Melbourne Uni. So to the principals here, what do you know now about emotional labour that perhaps you would have liked to know in your first year as principals? But the question is open for everyone else about how do we support them so that they feel they can continue to do it and not give up?
I think there's a few factors, and sorry for jumping in twice in a row, but
no, please do.
A few things that have really stood out for me. One is that we can't imagine to be perfect, and I forget the name of the author of the book, an English gentleman. You may well know him, Deb, who wrote the Imperfect Leadership book. And we can't think that we can do everything. One of the best bits of advice I ever got, and it was from my ex-wife. And she said, Campbell, you cannot do, you could work 3 or 4 more hours every single night, and you're only going to make a very small difference. She said, there has to be a point where you cut off and where you just leave it alone. You can't do everything, and you could fulfill all those hours with really hardworking, great intention stuff, but you need to be able to stop and say enough's enough for a day. So there are a couple of really important things that have guided some of my work.
Have you been able to do that, Cam?
I can. I think one of the things my colleagues and my staff admire about me is that I walk out the door most days at 4:30, and people say, how do you do that? And I say, well, I just prioritise what's important. What is important to me is great teaching and learning. And if you do great teaching and learning well, you get actually really great well-being outcomes because your children are having successes. They are doing very, very well. And so, I think we tend to have a large emphasis on well-being processes and systems in our schools. But one of the greatest well-being things that I've ever seen in a school across 2 schools, and I've led both those schools winning the state award, was just focus on really great teaching. So even that child is from a really disadvantaged space and a place is coming to school and having success. And when you're having success and feeling good about your work, you're actually going to have really good well-being. Yeah,
good point. Thank you so much, Campbell. Alan?
I think just reinforcing what Campbell said as well about the importance of your own well-being and prioritising that as well. And although I'd profess it and try and encourage my staff to do it, I'm quite bad at doing it myself. I'm trying to get much better at prioritising time at home with the family and spending time with the family, putting the laptop down and actually doing things with my wee boy, because that's time that you're never going to get back. I think back to one of the holidays we were on where I had an essay to finish for uni, sat on the balcony for 2 days typing away at the essay, and I was absolutely guilt-ridden with, that's 2 days you didn't come to the pool and play with me, but and it's those 2 days I will never get back, and I do reflect back on it.
Yeah.
I think, though, in Glasgow, we're quite fortunate as well. We've spoken about the in-headship and the into-headship programme. I won't go over that again, but we're also quite lucky as new head teachers in Glasgow that we're allocated a mentor. So for a year, I was allocated an experienced head teacher in a mentorship programme. Alison, who's in the call as well, facilitated and led on that through the Glasgow City Council and the University of Glasgow partnership. It's really quite valuable for me. I was matched with a head teacher who it was a similar demographic to me, a lot of significant need, a lot of additional needs in her school, and I could tap into her for a lot of support as well. But for me, she gave me a huge amount of confidence. I have mentioned in my wee presentation about imposter syndrome, but she absolutely helped me to thrive and bring that on. But I think definitely that the right person, the right relationship, and I probably would have chucked it sooner if I hadn't had that kind of guidance and support, but just that reinforcement of actually you're doing the right thing, you're doing a good job, and just keep doing what you're doing. It really has been invaluable. So I suppose we're quite privileged in Glasgow to have that programme.
Thank you, and great to have Alison here as well to hear that. So thank you for sharing. Megan.
I think, again, just echoing what Campbell said there, actually the successes, seeing young people having success, they're much more positive. Staff see success, they're much more positive. And, that kind of ethos and culture shift that can actually make things, feel a whole lot easier. There will still be critical incidents that happen. There will still be things that go on, but there might maybe not just be quite as much of, I'm trying to say, maybe the day-to-day things that can chip away and chip away when it feels quite relentless. But definitely, we've kind of spoken a little bit about the networks. My school is a denomination school, a Catholic school, so we also have a Catholic head network for secondary schools. One of the things that we do within the diocese in Glasgow is that we'll come together maybe once a term, and although there's a focus on what we're doing as Catholic schools to kind of ensure that the faith journey of our young people and that Catholic faith is part of the experiences of young people, we also have an opportunity for kind of prayer and reflection for ourselves as a group as well. And although I think people would look at that and say, what kind of professional learning is happening here? What kind of professional development? Actually, that time and that space, because I think we're all guilty of not giving ourselves that. I feel like, I can't leave before everyone else has left some nights, when I'm kind of in school. I feel like you've kind of got to be on top of everything, and it's really, really difficult. And I think in my first year, I spent so much time running around trying to be on everything and know about everything and have some level of kind of involvement in everything. And I very quickly realised that was not going to be sustainable for the future, and actually gave myself that kind of, that time to take time away and to reflect and, to go for professional learning opportunities and to take those mentor meetings and have them, at the end of the school day, and leave to go and have them and give myself that time and tap into those supports. So I think there's a real, it almost feels really, really guilty. And I think that leaders need to realise that actually it's like you can't pour from an empty cup or an empty jug. So, you need to take care of a bit of yourself so that you can then, support others when they're needing that as well, in terms of maybe what's going on, within the school.
Thanks, Megan. Campbell, I think you had something to say.
You just reminded me of something. I remembered at one stage in my early part of my career as a principal, I thought if I showed a lot of energy and I was moving around the school really, really quickly, and that people saw me moving between spaces really, really fast, and doing this thing and that thing, that they thought I was doing a really good job, and I got some feedback that I looked like a headless chicken, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And to counter that, I had this wonderful feedback from a coach for experienced principals that our system provided. And Wendy advised me of this technique, and she said, "Campbell, when do you actually work on your strategizing and your future sort of work?" And I reflected on that until our next meeting. I came back and I said, "Look, literally, I think I do it on the run." And so her advice was, I want you to set aside 2 hours every Friday morning to strategize and think about and reflect on your work, what you've done that week, what you're going to do next week, your longer term goals. And I said, Wendy, how am I going to do that? How am I going to get 2 hours on a Friday morning? She said, trust me and do it. And that very first Friday when I did it, my whole career changed. My whole ability to sit down, reflect, plan, prioritize. It gave me hours of extra time a week to do the things that I actually needed to do to make a difference. So yeah, it's just interesting, that whole notion of that thinking that we need to be intense, be there late, but in fact, I don't believe we do if we can actually strategize and do things really, really thoughtfully.
And about the quality of the work. Yeah, Deb, sorry.
Yeah, no, don't apologise. It's fine. And I do think it's interesting, Campbell, because you're the one who's brought Steve Mumby's work into the conversation this morning. So when I've spoken to Steve about this, I know that one of the things he thinks we've got a problem with is how instantly responsive the leaders in our system are having to be. So when he was director and chief executive of our National College for School Leadership, that later became Teacher Leadership, in the 2000s, the English system had a policy. One policy: every child matters. People like me were running advanced leadership courses across children's service environments. So we were working with directors of children's services, we were working with midwives, we were working with health visitors, I worked with people in housing in local authorities, and firefighters, a huge range of people who all connected with children. And built into that system was that time for reflection, personal reflection on practice. I'm teaching a module with my master's students at the moment on reflective practice. Most of the leaders I see in our system, and I'm not being critical of them at all, they're doing an amazing job in a very difficult time, but that time that we were talking about and we were recommending, and I know people like Steve recommend, you're now recommending it, it has gone for a lot of our leaders in the system. And that's one of the things that's really impacting, I think, on their ability to, for longevity, essentially.
Deb, we might stay with you. We've got just about 12 minutes left, and I think it's time to wrap up. So if you'd like to do that, and thank our invited guests.
Thanks, Bernie. That's great. Does anybody else want to come in first? Louise, I thought you might make a comment because you made a comment earlier on, and I know you've had building work going next to you. Did you get a chance to say everything you wanted to say this morning? Yeah? Okay. Anybody else want to come in before we move on? Is everybody okay? So it's interesting, isn't it? I think we've had another fascinating morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your contributions. I really think it works when we have academic input from people who've held those system leadership roles themselves. We can see their own trajectories, having moved into research, moving into that role that they're doing with their own students as well. And that being in discussion with practicing serving principles and seeing where your tensions are, and where the good bits are, and I thought, Alan, your slides with some of your excerpts that we can see, particularly that migration word being on your slides when I'd already sort of mentioned how kind of stretched and challenged some of our contexts are internationally now on that. So I think the themes that come out for me here, and we always think in terms of being co-conveners of our leadership preparation and development research interest group, we think about how sessions kind of roll into next sessions and what other research we're doing. So Bernie's just mentioned some research that her and Susanne have been doing. But I think for me, there is probably a gap in the literature, and I was just I'll go and spend some proper time looking at where that, I've put one of Kay Fuller's articles up, but I think for me there's a gap in the literature on the gendered nature of the emotional labour that happens, and whether or not, somebody mentioned it, I think, Megan, it might have been you when you were talking, just thinking about what perhaps the expectations are, and the expectations that come from a diocesan approach, for example, in comparison to other parts of the system. I think for me there are some gaps in the research around the gendered nature of that emotional leadership, and that I've mentioned the quadruple burden this morning. So looking at where that emotional, depth response, and we saw a lot of discussion on that in COVID, but a lot of the writing and research I've seen published post-COVID has been about the wider challenges rather than the impact on women. Because it seems to me, as with a lot of other things connected to COVID, as soon as we spent a lot of time in lockdown talking about how this potentially gave us an opportunity to do things differently. And yet, as soon as they finished around the world, we seem to have gone straight back into how things were done before. So I wonder if we've, for a start, missed an opportunity there to think about things differently and do things differently, but also think about the different ways in which we could move forward to examine some of that research in detail. And for me, for my own interests, some of the interests that have connected with both this RIG and our Gender and Education Leadership RIG, it's about that role that women have played in headship, in principalship, and perhaps some of the expectations on those female leaders being potentially different to the ones they are. I noticed, Louise, you put a comment in about how those male leaders in your network, they're very conscious of the fact that they're actually in competition with each other because their work's online, and therefore they're less likely to make those informal networks because they're seeing each other as competitors. I don't think for a minute, Campbell, that will be the issue with you, with your fellow principals in your locality, right? But when you're operating on an online space and everybody is a potential contributor or potential parent, potential student, then you can see how that would bring people into a different space. So there are some really interesting tensions there, I think, that are not very well explored yet in our research literature. But I also just wanted to open that out for a few final comments from you all, because we like listening to you as RIG co-conveners. We want to put on sessions that you find interesting. We always come back to the great work that's being done in the Scottish context. It was brilliant to have those inputs from you again this morning. Thank you very much. What else do you think, or would you like to see, that perhaps we could focus on future sessions? Oh, Lill, thanks. You just put the Blackmore reference up. I remember that from teaching a sociology module.
Yeah, there are, of course, others, but I think she was one of the first one to use the emotional labor from
useful,
and then
right.
Connecting it to the educational leadership practices.
Yeah.
So yeah, one can always start there. I think it was 99, but it might have been a few years before.
Yeah.
That
Lovely.
you're probably aware of course, but there is a lack, definitely.
So is there anything else you would like to see that you would think would be useful or interesting? Any sort of where in which the discussion spaces in which the discussions went to this morning that you'd perhaps like to see pulled out in any different contexts or for a different session? Nova?
Debs, I'm thinking, and this is not my area of interest research at all, but what I'm really interested in is some of the messages that have come out about those real societal things that are becoming very problematic. So Alan spoke about, the sort of protests, and this seems to be happening all over the UK. This sort of rise of almost extremism and sort of far right groups, and the sudden thing in Scotland that's happening about using the saltire as a symbol of exclusion rather than the inclusion it's always been. And I think that was not something that was an issue when I was a head teacher. I spent 10 years as a head, that wasn't an issue. And I wonder if it might be helpful for us to look at how we help, both through research and through practical terms, support school leaders who are suddenly having to deal with huge societal things that are coming into their school communities. Where do you even begin to start with that? Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good, really interesting thought. I just dropped Dave McPartlin a line going, our research interest group are talking about you again, because it's not the first time he's come up in discussions. And I think it is that, it's the changing context, isn't it? Schools are reflective of their societies. to a greater or a lesser extent reflective of certain bits of societies, depending on how stratified the bit of the system it is that you're in at the time. Alison.
Thank you. Yeah, I just kind of want to expand on what Nova's saying. I agree entirely. We'd done a scoping exercise with head teacher mentors around racial literacy, and it was a very kind of comfortable space. And what came out from that was that their lack of confidence in pushing back or challenging some of the racist rhetoric. For example, when parents and communities very strongly say there's anti-white racism from the school, while they know that's not true, how do we equip future or current leaders with the literacy and the confidence to be able to defend kind of social justice work and aspirations and practice within their school communities? And that's something that we have focused on in Scotland as part of our standards, social justice, but it is becoming so polarised and just quite frightening, I think, in terms of what's coming from communities. Alan gave that example today. So are we changing our programmes, and we're having to kind of we're responding rather than, you know, making sure that in the first place, when we are preparing head teachers, they have the confidence and the kind of protection as well, perhaps from the local authority or others that support them to deal with really, really complex issues and narratives and attitudes that are kind of defining what the purpose of education is as well.
And Alison, I'm fascinated by that actually, because all three of us, me, you and Nova, have all turned in part to the Centre for Leadership Diversity at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education at Toronto to give us some of the answers for that, haven't we? So we did presentations. You, I think, did one of the keynotes at that conference the other week. And so I'm fascinated again by the experience of the leaders in that system. Anne Lopez, who did our keynote at Belmas conference last summer, leaders in their system leading kind of the way, and then us wanting to be able to put that to good effect in the system, or into the system where we can see heads are challenging and challenged. And so part of that, we've just relaunched at Belmas our Race and Education Leadership Research Interest Group. They had their first meeting a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if, I'm thinking out loud here, I don't mean to put Bernie and Suzanne on the spot, I wonder if a future meeting, I think we've got a next couple in already, is perhaps a joint meeting with our Race and Education Leadership Group about where the intersections are in those social justice areas between gender, race, the challenges of how we kind of actively help and support school leaders to develop those toolkits to respond to those issues, Nova, that you're highlighting there. It's a huge issue. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the photos, but I drove down to London the other weekend, and on every single bridge down the M1 from Derbyshire to London, there was an English flag, at least one English flag on every bridge all the way down. You know, so it's a real symbol of the way in which different bits of communities, and it's not whole communities, it's not whole buy-in, but it's definitely, you know, politicization of something that hasn't been used in that way and utilized in that way before. Anybody else want to come in before we finish? Thoroughly great morning, everybody. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. We really appreciate serving principals time to contribute to discussions. It really makes them much, much, much more rich conversations. Thanks very much, everybody. We really, really appreciate it all.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our panel.
Thank you.
And our researchers from Sweden.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. That was a fantastic morning. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you in Belmas.